it's always quiet when it begins. The kind of quiet that wraps around you when the world has gone to sleep, and all you're left with is the glow of your phone and the sound of your own thoughts echoing in a space that feels too large for one heart to hold. You convince yourself it's natural, just a bit of harmless indulgence like scratching an itch. Everyone does it, right? A swipe here, a scroll there, a lingering look at a stranger who will never know your name. But under all that casual scrolling, something stirs, a discomfort, a hollow ache. It creeps in quietly, not just when it's over, but even while it's happening. You think it's about desire, but it's not. It's about something much older, something that lives deep beneath your skin. It's about the quiet parts of yourself that have gone unheard for too long. There's a reason this craving doesn't satisfy, why each climax leaves you emptier than before. Because it's not the body you seek, it's connection. Real, raw, soul-deep connection. But instead of turning inward, you reach outward, hoping that maybe this time it'll fill the gap. That maybe if you imagine hard enough, fantasize deeply enough, feel intensely enough, it'll be different. But it never is. What you're running from isn't boredom. It's the silence that follows you into every room, even when you're surrounded by people. That gnawing sensation that something's missing, something you can't quite name. And so you chase stimulation because it's easier than sitting still. Easier than facing the mirror that lives behind your eyelids every time you close your eyes. But that mirror doesn't lie. It reflects the truth you don't want to see. That this isn't about her or them or the thrill. It's about the part of you that's gone numb. The part that longs to be seen, not for the show you put on, but for who you really are when the masks fall away. And maybe that's the scariest part. That if someone saw all of you, your fears, your dreams, your broken pieces, they wouldn't stay. So you keep it on the surface. You chase the image, the idea, the momentary escape. But escape isn't freedom. It's a loop. A loop you've walked so many times, it feels like home. But it isn't. It's just familiar. And familiarity, even when it's painful, is hard to let go. Carl Jung spoke of the soul as a house with many rooms. Most people live in just one or two, never daring to open the others. Lust isn't just a desire. It's the sound of one of those doors shaking on its hinges, begging to be opened. Not to shame you, not to condemn you, but to call you back to parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. The tenderness you buried, the longing you silenced, the need you labeled as weakness. It's not just about wanting someone. It's about wanting to be held without condition, to be witnessed without judgment, to be chosen not for your body, not for your performance, but for the very essence of who you are. But how can you be chosen if you've never chosen yourself? How can you be loved if you don't even let yourself feel? And so, the pattern continues. The 2 a.m. searches, the fleeting highs, the drop into silence. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a subtle dullness, like color slowly draining from a photo, like music losing its rhythm, like touch that doesn't touch anything real. Because what you're craving can't be found on a screen or in a fantasy. It's the feeling of being whole, of returning to yourself. And maybe that's the hardest journey of all, because it requires staying, not with anyone else, but with you. Sitting in the stillness, feeling the ache without numbing it, listening to the voice you've ignored for so long, the one that says, "I miss you." That voice doesn't need another climax. It needs your presence. It needs you to stop running and start listening, to stop performing and start feeling. Because lust, when met with awareness, isn't something to fear. It's something to understand. It's not a curse. It's a compass pointing you back to the parts of you that need healing. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to indulge it blindly either. You just need to ask, What are you really trying to tell me? And in that question, you start the return, not to someone else, but to yourself. It doesn't leave you alone, not in the middle of a meeting, not while you're walking down the street, not even when you're laughing with friends. It waits, quietly, for a lull, a pause, a crack in your attention, and then it whispers again. That familiar urge, that pull, that ache. You try to explain it away. Stress, hormones, boredom. But deep down, you know those are just the masks it wears. What it really is longing. Not the kind that passes quickly, but the kind that's woven into your bones. And that longing doesn't go away when you satisfy it, because it was never about satisfaction. It was about searching for the piece of you that went missing long before you even knew it had a name. You see someone, her smile, her voice, the way she moves, and suddenly, you're not in control. Your mind builds stories before you even know her. You don't just want to touch her. You want to be known by her. Fully, deeply, quietly. But the trouble is, you've forgotten how to be known even by yourself. And so instead of reaching for connection, you reach for control, for fantasy, for the safety of a world where nothing can reject you, where no one can disappoint you, where everything bends to your desire. But no fantasy can love you. No image can hold you. No imagination can look into your eyes and say, I see you. And still you chase it, not because you're weak, but because you're starving. Starving for meaning in a world that keeps feeding you noise. Starving for intimacy in a life built on performance. Starving for softness in a culture that praises hardness. So, you keep reaching. One more message, one more scroll, one more body, and every time you tell yourself, this is the last. But it never is. Because what you're actually looking for isn't on the screen. It's buried beneath years of pretending. Pretending that you're fine, that you're just a guy with needs, that this is normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy. Normal doesn't mean true. Normal doesn't mean whole. And you know it. You feel it every time you close the app and sit in the silence that follows. That moment right after, the drop, the guilt, the emptiness, that's not weakness. That's your soul speaking. Trying to remind you that this isn't about sex. It's about something you've forgotten how to name. Maybe love, maybe presence, maybe the feeling of being held without needing to prove anything. Carl Jung never condemned desire. He listened to it. He followed it to its roots. And what he found wasn't sin. It was a signal, a signpost pointing toward the parts of ourselves we've silenced. He saw how men turn women into symbols, how we project our lost inner world onto someone else, hoping they'll return it to us. But no one can give you what you've buried. No one can complete a story you haven't even begun writing. And so, lust becomes a loop, a replay of the same story with different faces. And each time, you lose a little more of yourself in the search. What you're looking for isn't out there. It's the part of you left behind, the part that feels deeply, the part that breaks and still chooses to love, the part that's scared but shows up anyway. And until you reclaim that part, nothing you chase will ever satisfy, because no one can rescue you from your own disconnection. No touch can reach where you've gone numb. No moment can replace the years you spent avoiding your own soul. So, what do? You stop. Not forever, just long enough to feel, to breathe, to listen. You let the craving come, and instead of reacting, you sit with it. You let it speak. And it will. At first in whispers, then in waves. It will show you memories, old wounds, forgotten dreams. It will take you to the places you've refused to visit, and it will hurt. It will ache. But in that ache is truth, and in that truth is freedom. Because freedom isn't found in having everything you want. It's found in understanding what you truly need, and most of the time, it's not sex. It's safety, it's softness, it's being seen, and no screen can give you that. No fantasy can deliver it. It only comes when you stop running. When you stay. When you meet yourself in the place you've been avoiding. This isn't about shame. It's about honesty. It's about asking the questions you've been too scared to ask. Why am I really doing this? What am I actually feeling right now? What am I afraid I'll have to face if I stop? And the answers, they won't come all at once, but they will come. Slowly, gently, in moments when you least expect them. And with those answers comes a new kind of strength. Not the kind that resists desire, but the kind that understands it, that listens to it, that welcomes it as a guide, not a master. Jung called this integration, the process of bringing your shadows into the light, not to destroy them, but to heal them, to make peace with the parts of you once exiled. And in that peace, lust changes. It doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes art. It becomes intimacy. It becomes devotion. Not performance, not escape, but real presence. You don't need to punish yourself. You don't need to pretend you don't feel. You just need to stop pretending you're okay with being half alive. Because the moment you tell yourself the truth, everything begins to shift. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. You feel your emotions again. You stop numbing. You start creating. And for the first time in a long time, you start to feel whole. There comes a moment, maybe not loud or dramatic, but undeniable, when you realize that what you've been chasing was never really what you wanted. It's not about the thrill anymore. It's about the ache. The constant ache that doesn't go away, no matter how many times you give in. And that's when it hits you. This was never about them. It was always about you. About what you lost. About who you stopped being. About the quiet grief of a soul that's gone unheard. You sit there, maybe in the dark, maybe in the light of a morning that feels too sharp for how empty you feel inside, and you begin to wonder, what if I stopped trying to escape? What if I actually stayed here in this feeling without running from it, without numbing it, without dressing it up as something else? And in that stillness, something opens. Not a door, not a window, something more sacred, yourself. The part of you that remembers, the part that still believes in beauty, in depth, in meaning, the part that doesn't want another rush, but a return, not to another person, but to your own heart, to the warmth you buried under logic, to the softness you masked with sarcasm, to the need you covered up with pride, and you begin to see, this wasn't lust. Not really. It was loneliness with a mask. Hunger without a name. And now, stripped of the illusion, it's just you. Just your truth, your ache, your hope. And something strange happens. You don't run, you don't drown, you stay. And in staying, you begin to change. The craving doesn't vanish, but it doesn't control you. It becomes quieter, more honest. It starts to feel less like fire and more like warmth. Less like urgency, more like longing. And that longing, it's no longer about conquering. It's about connecting. About touching someone, not with your hands, but with your presence. About being with someone, not to fill a void, but to share a wholeness. You stop needing the noise. You stop chasing the high. Because now you have something else. A relationship with yourself. And it's not perfect. It's not easy. But it's real. You learn how to listen. You learn how to feel. And when those old patterns try to pull you back, you recognize them. You greet them, but you don't follow them. You breathe, you stay, you choose. And in those choices, a new story begins. One where intimacy is not a transaction, but a sacred exchange. One where you're not performing, but participating. One where love is not something to prove, but something to offer freely. Not because you're trying to be loved back, but because you finally remembered how to love yourself. And this doesn't mean you stop desiring. It means your desire becomes deeper, more rooted, more whole. You no longer want to possess. You want to partner. You want to build. You want to feel fully and honestly, even if it hurts, even if it's slow, even if it means being seen in all your vulnerability, because now you know there is nothing more sacred than being seen. Not for the fantasy you can create, but for the truth you can hold. And maybe, just maybe, someone else sees that in you. But even if they don't, you do. And that changes everything. Because once you see yourself, really see yourself, you no longer need to chase. You belong. Here. In your own skin, in your own breath, in your own presence. And that, more than any moment of pleasure, is what your soul was longing for all along.